Dr. Jack Murphy hated these things. Give him a lab full of alien tissue samples any day but force him to attend the annual Galactic Species Summit, pure torture. Yet here he was, tugging at the collar of his formal diplomatic attire while trying not to stare at the 12-tentacled being attempting to operate the coffee machine. You know, Dr. Murphy, some species consider it rude to watch them struggle with primitive technology, came a warbling voice from behind him. Jack turned to face Zorp, the impossibly cheerful representative from the Centauri Alliance. The aliens' bioluminescent spots were pulsing in what Jack had learned was their equivalent of barely contained excitement. Good morning, Zorp, and please for the 100th time, it's just Jack. He gestured toward the coffee machine. Should we help them before they accidentally create a new form of cold fusion? Oh no, watching Delegate Squish discover your human beverages is the highlight of my solar rotation. Zorp's spots flickered in amusement. Besides, Professor Klaxon is about to begin the keynote address, and you know how they get when someone's late. Jack grimaced. Professor Klaxon, the galaxy's foremost expert on evolutionary biology, had all the charm of a funeral director and the personality of a particularly bitter cactus. Their presentations were infamous for being longer than some species' life cycles. The main conference hall was already packed with representatives from across the galaxy. Jack spotted everything from crystalline beings that communicated through light patterns to what appeared to be a sentient cloud of gas wearing a name tag that read Bob. He found his assigned seat, conveniently located between a silicon-based life form that kept shedding and something that looked suspiciously like a very angry fern. Professor Klaxon floated onto the stage, their gelatinous form settling behind the podium with all the gravitas of someone about to announce the end of the universe. Distinguished colleagues, they began, their voice modulator set to what Jack privately thought of as pretentious echo mode. We gather here today to discuss the latest developments in cross-species evolutionary patterns. Jack settled in for what promised to be another mind-numbing session of comparative biology. He'd just started his mental list of ways to appear attentive while actually planning his grocery list when Professor Klaxon said something that made him choke on his coffee. And of course we must address the evolutionary anomaly that has puzzled our scientific community for decades, the curious case of humans and their complete lack of natural predators. The entire hall went silent. 300 pairs of eyes, optical sensors and various other sensory organs turned to stare at Jack. He could feel the coffee dripping down his chin. I'm sorry, he managed to sputter. But what do you mean lack of natural predators? Professor Klaxon's body rippled in what might have been confusion. Well, according to our studies, every sentient species evolved in response to predatory pressure. The Arcturians developed their armored shells, the Proxima Centaurians their camouflage abilities, even my own species' toxic secretions. But humans show no such evolutionary adaptations. That's because Jack started but was cut off by an enthusiastic tentacle wave from the back of the hall. Perhaps they were simply too toxic for anything to eat them, suggested Delegate Squish, who had apparently given up on the coffee machine and joined the discussion. No, chittered an insectoid being to Jack's left. Clearly they must have developed some form of psychic deterrent that we haven't detected yet. The room erupted into theories, each more ridiculous than the last. Jack sat there, mouth agape, as the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy debated whether humans had evolved from some form of inedible rock or if they were actually interdimensional beings who had simply forgotten their true origins. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, accidentally knocking over his coffee cup and causing the angry fern to recoil in horror. Excuse me, he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet hall. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't evolve without natural predators. We evolved because of them. In fact, he paused, suddenly realizing the gravity of what he was about to explain. Well, let's just say you might want to cancel the next session. This is going to take a while. Zorp's bioluminescent spots began pulsing at a frequency that suggested either extreme excitement or imminent explosion. Oh, this is going to be good, they warbled. Someone get the human another coffee, and maybe some visual aids. I have a feeling we're about to learn why they're the only species that named their planet's translation as dirt. The conference hall's holoprojector sprang to life as Jack pulled up Earth's evolutionary timeline. He'd originally prepared this presentation for introducing new xenobiology students to Earth's history, but it would have to do. Right, he began. Let's start with the basics. This is Earth. Roughly 4 billion years ago. At this point, the most dangerous thing you could encounter was probably bacteria. But give it a few 100 million years. The hologram shifted to show a prehistoric ocean scene. Several alien delegates leaned forward, presumably expecting something cute and peaceful. What they got instead was a Dunkleosteus. This lovely fellow had a bite force strong enough to punch through battleship armor, Jack explained cheerfully. A high-pitched whistle of distress came from somewhere in the back of the room. But don't worry, they went extinct. Which made room for these guys. The image changed to show a megalodon next to a scale model of a typical alien passenger ship. There was a collective gasp as the delegates realized the shark was larger. Now at this point some of you might be wondering why we didn't just stay on land. Jack continued, clicking to the next slide. Well, funny story about that. This is Arthropleura. Think of it like a centipede, except it's the size of a car. And this is Meganeura, a dragonfly with a wingspan wider than I am tall. And let's not forget, excuse me, interrupted a crystalline being, whose name tag identified them as Dr. Shimmer. But are you suggesting your species evolved while sharing its environment with these creatures? Oh no, Jack replied with a grin that made several delegates nervous. These were the nice ones. These are what we evolved alongside. The hologram shifted again, displaying a parade of prehistoric horrors that had several delegates either covering their sensory organs or quietly trying to edge toward the exits. Smilodons, terrorbirds, giant short-faced bears, and other megafauna filled the display in a cavalcade of teeth, claws, and evolutionary adaptations designed specifically for ending other creatures' existence. Professor Claxon's gelatinous form had gone completely still, which Jack recognized as their species equivalent of shocked disbelief. But how did you survive? We walked. You walked. Well, walked, ran, climbed trees, made tools, developed complex social structures, learned to use fire. Jack shrugged. You know, the usual. There is nothing usual about this. Professor Claxon's voice modulator had gone up several octaves. You're describing an evolutionary arms race that should have resulted in either extinction or the development of natural defenses. Instead, your species responded by becoming better at walking. Persistence hunting, Jack corrected. We're not particularly fast, but we can keep going long after other species need to rest. Plus, we're remarkably good at throwing things. The angry fern, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. Are you telling us that your species' response to living in an environment full of apex predators was to become an even more efficient apex predator? Well, when you put it that way, Jack paused, as realization dawned across the assembled delegates' faces. Oh come on, surely you all knew this already. I mean, what did you think humans were? Zorp, whose bioluminescent spots were now flashing in patterns that suggested either extreme fascination or an imminent seizure, raised a tentacle. We thought you were herbivores. The silence that followed this statement was broken only by the sound of Jack's hand meeting his forehead. Herbivores, he repeated flatly. You thought the species that developed faster than light travel because we got bored with being confined to one planet, that routinely drinks poison for fun, that invented sports specifically to simulate hunting and warfare, in our spare time, was a species of herbivore. You do consume a lot of plant matter, offered Delegate Squish helpfully. We eat everything. Jack threw his hands up in exasperation. We're omnivores. We evolved to be able to digest almost anything edible and some things that technically aren't. There are humans who eat rocks for the minerals. This statement caused another wave of distress among the delegates. Professor Claxon's form was now rippling in a way that suggested they were either having an existential crisis or experiencing indigestion. But that would make you an invasive species, Jack finished, suddenly realizing why the conference room felt a lot emptier than it had a few minutes ago. We're an invasive species that evolved on a death world, aren't we? The remaining delegates stared at him in horror. Zorp's spots had stopped flashing entirely, which was never a good sign. Well, Jack said brightly, reaching for his coffee cup, who wants to hear about the time we domesticated wolves because we thought they looked friendly? The sound of several hundred beings trying to leave the room at once while maintaining their dignity was, Jack had to admit, pretty impressive. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Scientific Council was called to order approximately 15 minutes after Jack's presentation, which he thought might be a new record for fastest bureaucratic response in the galaxy's history. He sat in what was clearly meant to be a witness chair, though its design suggested whoever built it had only heard about chairs through third-hand accounts. Professor Claxon had somehow managed to pull themselves together enough to lead the proceedings, though their gelatinous form still showed occasional ripples of distress. "We must approach this scientifically," they announced to the hastily assembled panel of experts. "There must be a rational explanation for how humans evolved without developing proper defensive adaptations." Actually, Jack tried to interject. "As I was saying earlier about persistence hunting," perhaps interrupted a spider-like being with an impressive array of academic medals clinking against their exoskeleton. "They developed psychological defenses instead of physical ones. It would explain their remarkable ability to ignore danger." "We don't ignore danger," Jack protested. "We're actually quite good at recognizing it. We just sometimes decide to poke it with a stick to see what happens." This statement caused such a stir among the assembled scientists that 3 different translation matrices overloaded at once. "You deliberately provoke dangerous situations?" asked a floating gas cloud that Jack recognized as Bob from earlier. "For what purpose?" "Well, sometimes for science, sometimes for fun, sometimes because someone said we couldn't." Jack shrugged. "Once we built a whole research station in Antarctica just because it was there." "Antarctica?" Zorp queried from their position as designated cultural expert. "Oh, that's one of our planet's frozen death zones where the air hurts your face and the ground is made of ice that's trying to eat you," Jack explained helpfully. "We have research bases there, some tourism, and I think there's a marathon." The room erupted into chaos again. Jack took advantage of the confusion to pull out his emergency coffee thermos, which prompted a nearby sensor specialist to frantically wave their appendages. "The human is consuming poison again. It's just coffee." Jack sighed, but paused mid-sip as he noticed every scientific instrument in the room was now pointed at him. "What are you doing?" "Measuring your toxicity levels," Professor Claxon explained. "The presence of multiple poison processing organs must be the key to your species' survival. You're clearly some form of toxic organism." "We're not toxic, we're just very good at processing different types of." Jack stopped as several displays started beeping alarmingly. "What now?" "Your caffeine levels are approaching what would be lethal for most species," said the sensor specialist faintly. "And you're showing no signs of distress." "Of course not. This is only my 3rd cup today." Jack took another deliberate sip, causing several more alarms to go off. "Look, can we get back to the actual evolutionary discussion about how humans developed endurance hunting and tool use?" "Tool use?" exclaimed a previously quiet fungoid being. "That's it. They're not naturally evolved at all. They must be an artificial species created by some ancient civilization." Jack put his head in his hands as the debate spiraled into new realms of ridiculous. Theories now included humans being extra-dimensional immigrants, a failed bioweapon experiment, or possibly a practical joke by an advanced precursor race. "We need to establish containment protocols," announced a stern-looking being whose ceremonial sash identified them as the head of the Emergency Response Committee. "Until we can determine how this species achieved space travel without properly documented evolutionary processes, they must be considered an existential threat." "Oh, come on." Jack stood up, accidentally demonstrating human strength by lifting the heavy alien chair with him as he rose. He set it down carefully, trying not to worsen the situation. "We achieved space travel the same way we did everything else. We kept trying until it worked." "And how many of your species died in these attempts?" asked Professor Claxon, their voice modulator conveying what might have been horror or fascination. "Well, some," Jack admitted. "But that's just how humans learn. We see something challenging, we keep trying different approaches until we succeed or figure out it's impossible, and then we usually keep trying anyway just to make sure." The room had gone very quiet. Even the automatic translators seemed to be processing this statement with unusual care. "You continue attempting impossible tasks?" asked Bob, their gaseous form condensing slightly in what might have been confusion. "Well, yeah. How else would we figure out if they're really impossible or just really difficult?" Jack reached for his coffee again, then noticed the sensor specialist was about to faint. "Oh, fine, no more coffee. But can we please focus on the actual science here? I've got charts about tool use development, social cooperation strategies, and the evolutionary advantages of being able to eat practically anything. You want us to discuss how your species deliberately evolved to be able to consume unknown substances?" Professor Claxon's voice had taken on a slightly hysterical edge. "No, I want to discuss how we evolved to be adaptable. We're not special because we lack natural predators. We're special because we learned to adapt to and survive whatever our environment threw at us." Jack was properly frustrated now. "We're not toxic, we're not artificial, and we're definitely not a cosmic joke. We're just really, really stubborn. The Emergency Response Committee huddled together presumably to discuss this new and troubling information. Jack could hear fragments of their whispered conversation. Cannot be natural evolution. The implications for galactic security. Did you see how much poison they can consume? Finally, the committee head turned back to address the room. We have decided to form an emergency committee on human containment, effective immediately. Jack slumped back in his chair, which creaked ominously. You're still not listening to the actual science, are you? The committee will need detailed information about human capabilities, continued the head, as if Jack hadn't spoken. Professor Claxon, you will lead the research team. And Dr. Murphy, just Jack is fine, he muttered. You will assist in documenting all of humanity's evolutionary advantages and disadvantages. Jack straightened up. Well, actually, that might be a bit complicated. You see, one of our main advantages is that we're really good at turning apparent disadvantages into advantages. Like we're not very good at regulating our body temperature naturally, so we invented climate control. We can't fly, so we built aircraft. We can't breathe underwater, so we made submarines. Actually, come to think of it, a lot of our technological development came from us looking at things we couldn't do and deciding to do them anyway. He trailed off as he realized the committee members were all backing away slowly. Perhaps, suggested Zorp, whose spots were now pulsing in what Jack recognized as they're trying to prevent a diplomatic incidents pattern, we should take a brief recess to process this new information. Good idea, agreed Jack, standing up again carefully this time. I could use another coffee anyway. The room emptied so quickly it almost created a vacuum. The Emergency Committee on Human Containment had been in session for 6 hours, which Jack knew because he'd watched 3 different species need to take their equivalent of a lunch break. He'd spent most of that time trying to explain basic human capabilities without causing further panic, with mixed results. So to summarize, Professor Claxon's voice modulator was struggling to maintain its professional tone. Humans can survive for 3 minutes without breathing, 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food, more or less, Jack confirmed. Though some humans have gone longer. There's this thing called fasting, please, interrupted the committee head. No more examples of voluntary human endurance. The psychological evaluation team is still processing the concept of Jack glanced over at the psychological evaluation team, a group of tentacled beings who had been frantically taking notes since his earlier explanation of ultramarathons. One of them appeared to be stress shedding. Look, he tried again. I really think you're all overreacting. Yes, humans are persistent and adaptable, but that's because we had to be. We're not some unstoppable force of nature. You literally described your species as too stubborn to die less than an hour ago, pointed out Bob, who had been assigned as the official recorder of the proceedings. That was hyperbole. Well, mostly hyperbole. Sometimes we are actually too stubborn to die, but that's more of a side effect than a Jack cut himself off as he noticed several committee members reaching for their emergency calm-inducing pheromone dispensers. You know what? Never mind. Can we focus on the classification protocols? The committee had activated a holoscreen displaying the current draft of humanity's revised species classification. Jack had to admit, it was impressive how quickly they'd created an entirely new category just for humans. Classification Apex Invasive Species, he read aloud. Threat level extreme, primary characteristics, toxic resistance, environmental adaptation, psychological abnormalities. Oh, come on, we're not psychologically abnormal. You invented recreational mathematics, said one of the psychological evaluators, their tentacles curling in distress. And competitive eating, added another. And parkour, concluded a third, who had earlier required sedation after watching videos of urban freestyle running. Those are just hobbies, Jack protested. Every species has hobbies. Normal species do not deliberately jump between high structures for entertainment. The committee head's ceremonial sash was beginning to fray from stress. That's not even the weird stuff, Jack muttered, then immediately regretted it as every recording device in the room focused on him. No, wait, forget I said that. Let's go back to discussing our environmental adaptations. There's more. Professor Claxon's form had gone so still they were nearly transparent. No, absolutely not. Let's talk about something else. Like our classification status. I really think apex invasive species is a bit strong. Maybe something like adaptable social omnivores or innovative tool users. The human is attempting to downplay their species' capabilities, observed one of the security analysts. This suggests they possess strategic intelligence in addition to their other advantages. Of course we have strategic intelligence. How do you think we? Jack stopped himself again. You know what? This isn't helping. Let me try a different approach. He stood up and walked to the center of the room, careful not to make any sudden moves. I propose a practical demonstration. Let me show you how humans actually solve problems. No extreme endurance, no toxin resistance, no psychological abnormalities, just straightforward human problem solving. The committee members exchanged uncertain looks. Finally the head spoke. What kind of demonstration? Something simple. You pick a task, any task, and I'll show you how a human approaches it. Complete transparency. After several minutes of heated discussion in at least 6 different languages, the committee agreed. They presented Jack with what they considered an impossible puzzle, a sealed container designed to be opened only by species with telepathic abilities. Jack examined the container for approximately 30 seconds before asking, "Hey Zorp, hold my coffee." The entire room tensed. Those words they had learned never preceded anything good. 15 minutes later, the committee was adding concerning mechanical aptitude and unusual lateral thinking capabilities to humanity's classification file, while Jack tried to explain that using a spoon as a makeshift lever was really not that impressive, but it was designed to be telepathically operated. Professor Claxon had given up on maintaining their professional demeanor. The locking mechanism shouldn't even be visible to non-psychic species. Yeah, but you can see where the seams are, Jack pointed out. And anything with seams can be opened if you're persistent enough. Though I probably shouldn't mention the time humans cracked quantum encryption by. No, shouted several committee members at once. Right. Sorry, backing away from that topic. Jack reclaimed his coffee from Zorp, whose spots were now pulsing in what might have been either amusement or existential dread. So about that classification status, the committee will need time to process this new information, announced the head, their sash now completely unraveled. We will reconvene after a brief recess to discuss humanity's final classification and containment protocols. As the committee members filed out, Jack heard one of them mutter, "Perhaps we should have left them in their original quarantine zone." He turned to Zorp, who had remained behind. Quarantine zone. Zorp's spots flickered in what was definitely embarrassment now. Ah yes, about that. You see, there's something we probably should have mentioned earlier about why your solar system was originally marked as off-limits. Jack had a feeling part 5 of this disaster was about to begin. The conference room had been hastily converted into what Jack could only describe as an interstellar incident management center. Holographic displays showed Earth's solar system from various angles, each marked with glowing quarantine warnings that, according to Zorp, had been in place for roughly 12,000 years. Let me get this straight, Jack said, pinching the bridge of his nose. You're telling me that when your early survey ships found Earth, they classified it as a death world. To be fair, Zorp's spots were pulsing in defensive patterns. It met all the criteria. Extreme temperature variations, aggressive megafauna, volatile weather patterns, active geological instability, and of course the oxygen. What's wrong with oxygen? What's wrong with oxygen? It's highly corrosive. Professor Claxon had returned, along with what appeared to be half the Galactic Scientific Council. Your entire planet is constantly bathed in a corrosive atmosphere. We thought nothing could possibly evolve there naturally. So you quarantined us? We quarantined the planet, corrected the committee head. We had no idea it contained sapient life. The original survey team took one look at a pack of wolves hunting a mammoth, declared the entire system a biological hazard, and put up warning beacons. Jack took a long sip of his coffee, causing several nearby scientists to flinch. And nobody checked on us? For 12,000 years? Well, Zorp's embarrassment was now visible from across the room. There was supposed to be a follow-up survey, but there was some bureaucratic confusion about which department was responsible. Stellar cartography said it was biology's jurisdiction. Biology said it fell under hazardous environments. Hazardous environments insisted it was a matter for xenoanthropology, which hadn't been invented yet, added Bob helpfully. Right, so the paperwork kept getting shuffled around, and then there was that whole mess with the Centaurian Civil War, and by the time anyone remembered to check, you had already developed radio technology. At that point it became First Contact's problem, but they were dealing with budget cuts, so you just forgot about us. More like actively avoided thinking about you, Professor Claxon admitted. Every few centuries, someone would review the quarantine file, see the words death world and corrosive atmosphere, and decide it was somebody else's problem, until we invented faster-than-light travel, and showed up at your doorstep, Jack finished. Do you have any idea how many regulations you violated? The committee head was reading through an ancient file. Your first contact team broke 17 different quarantine protocols just by landing. We didn't know about the protocols. Nobody told us. The warning beacons were written in a language nobody on Earth had ever seen. We thought they were navigation markers. A new display activated, showing humanity's rapid expansion across the galaxy over the past few decades. Jack had to admit, when viewed all at once like this, it did look a bit aggressive. Oh no, he said as realization dawned. We're not just an invasive species, are we? We're an invasive species that broke out of containment. The room went very quiet, and Jack did some quick mental calculations. We've been establishing colonies on what you considered death worlds, haven't we? Because to us they just looked like nice real estate with some minor environmental challenges. Minor environmental challenges? Professor Claxon's voice modulator cracked. The atmosphere on Kepler 186f is mostly chlorine. Yeah, but the protective domes work fine, and the view is gorgeous. Jack paused. This is another one of those things that's going to freak you out, isn't it? The psychological evaluation team had already started taking notes again. Let me see if I understand this correctly, said one of the senior scientists, a crystalline being who had been quiet until now. Your species not only evolved on a death world, but adapted so completely that you stopped considering it dangerous. Then when you achieved spaceflight, you proceeded to colonize other death worlds because you didn't realize they were supposed to be uninhabitable. Well, when you put it that way, it sounds bad, Jack admitted. But look on the bright side, now you know why we didn't have any natural predators. Turns out, we were the scariest thing on our planet. This statement did not have the reassuring effect he'd hoped for. The quarantine protocols, muttered the committee head. All those careful containment procedures, the warning beacons, the interdiction zones, and humans just walked right through them because they didn't realize they were supposed to be impossible to survive. In our defense, Jack tried. Most of your warning signs involve things like corrosive atmosphere or extreme gravity or toxic environment. That's basically just Tuesday on Earth. Professor Claxon's form had started to vibrate slightly. You mean to tell me that every safety protocol we established, every hazard warning we posted, every danger sign we created, was calibrated for normal species? I mean, define normal, Jack said, but the professor was on a roll. The entire galactic safety classification system is based on the assumption that no sapient species would evolve and let alone voluntarily enter environments that are actively trying to kill them. Now you're getting it, Jack grinned. We don't just survive hostile environments, we set up gift shops in them. I think there's a tourist center in Death Valley now. Great coffee shop, actually. The committee members were all staring at the display of human expansion with new understanding. Every red warning marker, every hazard zone, every declared uninhabitable sector had human colonies cheerfully thriving in them. We're going to have to rewrite the entire xenobiological classification system, someone said faintly. And the safety protocols. And the colonization guidelines. And possibly the laws of evolution, added Professor Claxon, who appeared to be having some sort of scientific epiphany. Jack looked around the room at the assembled greatest minds in the galaxy, all of them struggling to reconcile their understanding of life with the reality of human existence. He thought about explaining how humans had essentially speedrun evolution by refusing to stay in any one environmental niche, but decided they'd probably had enough revelations for one day. So, he said instead, about that containment protocol. The committee head looked at the quarantine displays, then at the human expansion map, then at Jack's coffee cup. I think, they said carefully, we may need to consider a different approach. The Galactic Council's emergency session was in its third day, which Jack thought was pretty good considering it had taken them 12,000 years to check on Earth in the first place. He sat in the observer's gallery with Zorp, watching various species argue about how to handle the human situation. I still don't understand why they're so worried, he said, sipping from his 14th coffee of the day. We haven't actually hurt anyone. Jack, Zorp's spots were pulsing, and what he'd learned was they're trying to explain something obvious pattern. Your species just established a skiing resort on an ice planet that we used as a maximum security prison because we thought nothing could survive there. The slopes are amazing though. That's not the point. But Zorp's spots flickered with what might have been amusement. The galaxy is trying to process the fact that every safety protocol, every warning system, every danger classification we've developed over millions of years is, well, completely useless for humans. I was going to say in need of revision, but yes. Below them Professor Claxon was presenting their findings to the council. Their gelatinous form had finally stabilized, though they occasionally rippled when discussing particularly disturbing aspects of human behavior. And so we must conclude that humans are not, as previously theorized, an artificial species, a cosmic accident, or an interdimensional anomaly. They are, in fact, the natural result of evolution on a planet that we would consider universally hostile to life. Hey, Jack protested. Earth isn't hostile to life. It's got lots of life. All kinds of life. Some of it even glows in the dark. Please, the council head raised several appendages in a calming gesture. Let's not start listing Earth's biological hazards again. The biology committee is still processing the concept of platypuses. Professor Claxon continued. Our research suggests that humans' apparent lack of natural predators is not, as we first assumed, an evolutionary anomaly. Rather, they evolved in an environment where everything was a potential predator, leading to the development of what we're calling universal adaptation syndrome. You mean being stubborn? Jack whispered to Zorp. The official term is more diplomatic. Zorp whispered back. The question before this council, the head announced, is how to proceed. Our existing containment protocols are clearly ineffective, as humans simply ignore them. Our warning systems are meaningless to a species that evolved to treat deadly hazards as mild inconveniences. And our colonization guidelines? They paused, glancing at a report. Well, apparently humans have established an underwater research station on a planet we classified as completely submerged and highly acidic. The surfing is fantastic, Jack commented, earning several alarmed looks. Therefore, the head continued, I propose a new approach. Instead of trying to contain humanity, we should redirect them. The council chamber erupted in confused discussion. Jack leaned forward, interested despite himself. Explanation? Asked one of the senior council members. We've been looking at this backward, the head explained. We've been trying to protect humans from environments we consider dangerous, when we should have been using their unique adaptability to our advantage. There are countless worlds we've written off as uninhabitable that humans not only survive on but actually enjoy visiting. You want to use us as planetary colonization consultants? Jack asked, finally catching on. We want to establish a new division, the head corrected. The Department of Extreme Environment Adaptation and Development, DED for short. That's a bit on the nose, isn't it? Jack muttered to Zorp. Humans will serve as advisors on colonizing and developing worlds that other species consider too hazardous to approach. In return, they agree to submit their colonization plans for review before settling new worlds, just to ensure they're not accidentally disrupting any existing ecosystems or scientific research stations. What about the existing colonies? Someone asked. Retroactively approved, the head sighed. It's not like we can stop them anyway. Have you seen what they did to that volcanic moon they found last month? They're growing coffee there now. Jack tried to look innocent as several council members glared in his direction. All in favor? The vote was nearly unanimous, with only a few abstentions from species that were still trying to process the concept of voluntary mountain climbing. Well, Jack said as they left the chamber, that went better than expected. Want to grab a coffee? I know this great place on Mercury, I think, Zorp replied carefully. I'll stick to my non-corrosive beverages. But I have to ask, why did your species really achieve faster than light travel? Was it actually because you were bored? Jack grinned. Nah, that was just what we told everyone. The truth is, someone said it was impossible. And well, you know how humans are with impossible things. Actually, Zorp's spots pulsed thoughtfully. I'm beginning to understand exactly how humans are with impossible things, and that's what terrifies us. Come on, Jack said, heading toward the transport bay. Let me show you this great little bed and breakfast we set up in the upper atmosphere of Venus. The view of the acid storms is spectacular. Behind them, the council was already drafting new warning signs. This time, instead of danger extreme hazard, they would read caution mulled to moderate human recreational area. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start.